I spent 32 years believing that if I kept the peace, I would earn my place. Then, over dinner, my father looked me in the eye and handed my brother the entire estate. I thought that was the betrayal, but it was only the trigger. Our family empire wasn't a legacy. It was a lie held together by a $5.1 million secret, and my father had just accidentally pulled the pin. The drive from Marrow Bay to Alder Creek always felt less like a commute and more like a regression. As the highway smoothed out into the two-lane asphalt of Route 9, the reception on my phone dropped from 4 bars to 2, and the sleek gray skyline of the city vanished behind a curtain of pine and oak. I was 32 years old. I had a job I was good at, an apartment I paid for, and a life that belonged to me. Yet, every time the tires of my sedan hit the cracked pavement of the county line, I felt the familiar weight of the dutiful daughter settling over my shoulders like a wool coat that was too heavy and smelled of mothballs. My father, Dale Phillips, had summoned me for a family announcement. He had not asked. He had told. That was the dynamic. I was the reliable one. I was the one who showed up. When Mom got sick 3 years ago, I was the one who drove down every weekend to sort her pills and argue with insurance companies while my brother, Grant, was busy in the city expanding his network. When the roof at the lake cabin leaked last winter, I was the one who drove out to meet the contractor because Dad was too busy with the company and Grant was on a ski trip. I expected today to be mundane. I expected a lecture about loyalty, perhaps a discussion about the upcoming fiscal quarter for Barlow Ridge Development, the construction firm that had built half the town and fed our family for 2 generations. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in. It was a sprawling Victorian that my father maintained with obsessive precision. The lawn was cut in diagonal stripes. The white paint was blinding in the late afternoon sun. It looked perfect. It always looked perfect. I parked next to Grant's SUV. It was brand new, black, and waxed to a mirror shine. Of course, Grant was already here. He was likely inside pouring Dad a scotch, laughing at jokes that were not funny, and posturing for whatever approval he could wring out of the old man. I took a breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror to ensure my expression was neutral, and stepped out of the car. The dinner began with the usual pageantry. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table, a king in his castle. Grant sat to his right. I sat to his left. The air smelled of roast beef and floor wax. We ate in a silence that was not peaceful but heavy, filled with the scraping of silverware against china. Dale cleared his throat. It was a sound that commanded attention, a rumble that used to make me sit up straight when I was 6 years old. It still did. I have been thinking a lot about the future, Dale said. He placed his knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly on the edge of his plate. I took a sip of water, waiting for him to talk about retirement or perhaps a new development project. Grant was watching him with a look I could not quite place. It was eager, but there was a tightness around his eyes. You know how much this family means to me, Dale continued. He looked at Grant, then briefly at me, before his gaze settled back on his son. And you know that Barlow Ridge is not just a company, it is a legacy. It is the name on the high school stadium. It is the name on the library wing. I nodded. I knew the speech. I had heard variations of it my entire life. Grant has really stepped up lately, Dale said. He smiled, a rare expression that did not quite reach his eyes. He has been shadowing me. He has been taking meetings. He is carrying the family name. I felt a small prick of annoyance. Grant had attended 3 meetings in the last month. I knew this because I handled the calendar syncs for the family trust, but I kept my face smooth. So, Dale said, his voice dropping to a register that implied supreme wisdom, I have made a decision regarding the estate. I braced myself for a distribution plan. Usually, these things were split, 50-50, or perhaps 40-60 if Dad was feeling particularly patriarchal. Dale leaned back. I have decided that Grant deserves the entire estate. The room seemed to tilt. I blinked. Sure, I had misheard. Excuse me? I asked. My voice was quiet. The entire estate, Dale repeated. as calmly as if he were discussing the weather. The house, the lake cabin, and anything tied to the business. He needs the capital and the assets to keep the company strong. Splitting it up would only weaken the foundation. I sat there, frozen. My hands were in my lap, gripping my napkin so hard my knuckles turned white. It was not about the money. I had my own savings. I had my own career. It was the erasure. It was the absolute dismissal of every hour I had spent managing Mom's hospice care, every holiday I had cooked, every crisis I had managed so Dale could focus on his precious development deals. Grant deserves it, Dale said, nodding to himself. He is the future of Barlow Ridge. I looked at Grant, my brother, the boy I had covered for when he crashed his car in high school, the man who had borrowed $10,000 from me 5 years ago and never paid it back. He was looking at the table, a tight, performative smile plastered on his face. Grant looked up and met my gaze for a fraction of a second before looking away. "Lucy," Grant said, his voice smooth, practiced, "you know I will make sure you are taken care of." The phrase landed like a slap. Taken care of. Like a pet. Like an invalid. It was a warning wrapped in charity. He was avoiding specifics. He was not saying he would buy me out. He was not saying he would share the dividends. He was saying he would toss me scraps if I behaved. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you are disinheriting me." "It is not disinheritance," Dale said, frowning. He looked offended that I would use such an ugly word. "It is strategy. The assets need to stay consolidated. Grant understands the vision. You have your life in Marrow Bay. You are happy there. I am not happy being written out of my own family." I said, "Do not be dramatic," Dale snapped. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by the stone wall I knew so well. "This is for the good of the family name. If you cannot see that, then you are proving my point. You do not have the stomach for the hard decisions." I stared at him. The stomach for hard decisions? I was the one who held Mom's hand while she died, because he could not bear to be in the room. I was the one who signed the "do not resuscitate" order because he was weeping in the hallway. Grant reached out and touched his father's arm. "Let us not fight, Dad. Lucy is just surprised." I stood up. "I need some air," I said. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway that was lined with portraits of our ancestors, grim-faced men who had built things and the women who had supported them in silence. I went out onto the back porch. The night air was cool, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back inside and flip the mahogany table, but I did not. I was Lucy. I was reliable. I was steady. I breathed in, counting to 10, trying to force the burning sensation in my chest to subside. They were talking inside. The window to the dining room was cracked open just an inch. I moved closer to the wall, standing in the shadows of the wisteria vine that climbed the trellis. But the timing, "Dad," Grant was saying. His voice was lower now, stripped of the confidence he had displayed at the table. "Are you sure this is the right move right now? The partner is getting nervous. He will be fine," Dale's voice replied. It was sharp, dismissive. "This shows strength. This shows consolidation. It is exactly what we need to project. But if she finds out about the agreement—" Grant started. "She will not find out." Dale cut him off. His voice was cold, a sound like ice cracking. "She lives 2 hours away. She thinks this is just about tradition. Keep it that way." There was a pause. The silence stretched, filled with the chirping of crickets. "If she finds out, we lose everything," Dale said. The words hung in the air. "We lose everything. Not just money, everything." I stepped back from the window, my blood running cold. This was not just about sexism. This was not just about Dale favoring his son. There was fear in my father's voice, genuine, palpable fear. I went back to my car, retrieved my overnight bag, and walked upstairs to my old bedroom. I did not go back to the dining room. I locked my door, lay down on the twin bed that still had the quilt my grandmother made, and stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep. I listened to the sounds of the house, the creak of the stairs, the murmuring of voices in the study, and finally, the heavy silence of 3 in the morning. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple color as the sun struggled to break through the mist. I left the house before Dale or Grant were awake. I needed to be somewhere where the silence was honest. I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. It was a quiet place, shaded by massive oaks. My mother's headstone was simple. Eleanor Phillips, beloved wife and mother. I stood there for a long time, tracing the letters with my eyes. I am sorry. Mom, I whispered. I do not know what they are doing. There was the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned to see Mrs. Gable walking her terrier. She was an old friend of the family, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business in Alder Creek before they knew it themselves. Lucy, she said, her face softening. I did not expect to see you so early. Hi, Mrs. Gable, I said. I just needed to visit her. She nodded, stopping beside me. She was a good woman, the best of them. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Mrs. Gable looked at me, her expression shifting. She looked almost pitying. I heard about the announcement. She said, "Word travels fast in this town. Grant getting the helm." "Yes," I said stiffly. "Dad thinks it is best for the business." Mrs. Gable frowned. She looked around, as if checking to see if the headstones were listening. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "it is a heavy burden for Grant, especially with things being the way they are." I looked at her. "The way they are?" "Oh, you know," she said, waving a hand vaguely. "The estate isn't as clean as Dale tells people." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Not clean?" Mrs. Gable's eyes widened. She realized she had said too much. She pulled on the leash. "Oh, nothing. Just business talk. Rumors. You know how people like to talk when permits get delayed. I should get going. Buster needs his breakfast. Mrs. Gable," I said, taking a step toward her. "Please." She shook her head, backing away. "It is not my place. Lucy, forget I said anything." She hurried away, the little dog trotting beside her. I watched her go, the unease in my stomach hardening into a knot. I got back in my car. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an unknown number, a local area code, but not Alder Creek, Marrow Bay. I picked it up. "Hello? Is this Lucy Phillips?" A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "Yes, this is she. This is the office of Eleanor Vance, representing a private investor regarding Barlow Ridge development. We have been trying to reach you." I frowned. "Representing an investor? Why are you calling me?" "I am not an officer of the company. You want my father? Dale Phillips. We have already sent correspondence to Mr. Dale Phillips," the woman said. Her tone was impatient. "We are calling to confirm your current mailing address for delivery of an official notice." "Notice of what?" I asked. "I cannot discuss the contents of the notice over the phone." "Ms. Phillips, I just need to verify that you reside at 402 Maple Avenue, apartment 4B, in Marrow Bay." "Yes," I said, my mind racing. "That is my address, but I do not understand. What does this have to do with me?" "The notice will explain." She said, "It has been sent via courier. Good day." The line went dead. I sat in the car, staring at the phone. An investor. Barlow Ridge was supposed to be family-owned. Dad always bragged that he never took outside money. He said banks were sharks and partners were parasites. I drove to a coffee shop on Main Street. Avoiding the house, I needed Wi-Fi, and I needed to be away from Dale's suffocating presence. I opened my laptop and logged into the county clerk's public records portal. It was a clunky website that looked like it had not been updated since 2005, but the data was there. I searched Barlow Ridge Development. The list of filings populated the screen. At first glance, it looked normal. Deeds, easements, standard construction permits, but I started looking closer. I looked at the dates. In the last 6 months, there were 4 liens filed against company equipment, heavy machinery, bulldozers, excavators, used as collateral for short-term loans. That was unusual. Barlow Ridge usually owned its equipment outright. I dug deeper. There was a refinancing agreement filed 3 months ago on the commercial lots near the river. The interest rate was not listed, but the lender was a private LLC I had never heard of. Obsidian Capital. Then I saw the permits, rushed applications, fees paid for expedited processing on projects that, according to the town paper, had not even broken ground yet. It looked like a company that was running to stand still. It looked like a company that was desperate to show activity on paper. Nothing here was illegal. Businesses took loans. Businesses rushed permits. But combined with Mrs. Gable's comment and the phone call from the lawyer, it painted a picture of a structure that was vibrating under stress. I closed the laptop. My coffee had gone cold. I drove back to the house. Grant's car was gone. Dale's truck was in the driveway. I found him in his study. He was staring at a blueprint spread out on his desk, but he was not really looking at it. He was staring through it. "Dad," I said from the doorway. He looked up. His face composed itself instantly into the mask of the patriarch. "Lucy, I thought you had left." "I went to visit Mom," I said. He nodded solemnly. "That is good. She would have wanted you to accept this with grace." I ignored that. "I got a phone call while I was out." He frowned. "Who called you?" "A law office," I said, watching his face closely. "Representing an investor in Barlow Ridge. They are sending me an official notice." For a split second, the mask cracked. His eyes widened, and his mouth opened slightly. It was a micro-expression of pure panic. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He stood up, waving a hand dismissively. "Scammers," he said, "or headhunters. We get calls like that all the time. Ignore it. They knew my name." "Dad," I said, "they knew my address. They said it was about an investor. You always told us you never took outside partners." "I do not," he snapped. He walked around the desk, his posture aggressive. He was trying to intimidate me. "It is probably some vendor dispute, a supplier trying to squeeze us. I will have Grant handle it." "Why would a vendor dispute involve me?" I asked. "I have nothing to do with the company. You made that very clear last night." Dale stopped in front of me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, imposing. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel small. I felt alert. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. His voice was low. "Dangerous." "Doing what?" "Looking for trouble." He said, "You are angry about the estate." "I get it. You are hurt. So now you are trying to stir up drama. You are trying to find cracks where there are none just to punish me." "I am not punishing you," I said. "I am asking a question. It is a grand day for your brother." Dale said, "Do not ruin it with your paranoia. Go back to Marrow Bay. Lucy, go back to your life. Let the men handle the business." He turned his back on me. The dismissal was absolute. I stood there for a moment, looking at his broad back. I realized then that the anger I had felt the night before was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I walked out of the study. I walked out of the house. I threw my bag into the passenger seat of my car. As I backed out of the driveway, looking at the perfect white house with its perfect striped lawn, I realized the truth. Dale had not cut me out because he thought I was weak. He had not cut me out because he loved Grant more. He had cut me out because I was the one who read the fine print. I was the one who asked questions. Grant was useful because Grant was blind. He would sign whatever Dale put in front of him just to feel important. I gripped the steering wheel as I turned onto the main road. I was not excluded because I was unworthy. I was excluded because I was inconvenient. And whatever was happening with that $5.1 million secret, whatever reason they had for terrifying silence, I was clearly in the middle of it. I hit the gas, leaving Alder Creek in the rearview mirror. But I knew I would be coming back, and next time, I would not be asking for permission. I drove toward Marrow Bay, the envelope from the law firm likely waiting in my mailbox, ticking like a bomb. I drove for an hour in silence before I turned on the radio. I needed noise. I needed something to drown out the loop of my father's voice saying, "If she finds out, we lose everything." What was everything? The house was leveraged. That much I could guess. The business was likely in debt. But everything implied ruin. It implied a total collapse. I thought about the timeline. Mom died 3 years ago. Before that, she had been the bookkeeper. She had kept the accounts for Barlow Ridge for 30 years. She was meticulous. If there was a silent partner, if there was a secret infusion of cash, she would have known, unless that was why she was so anxious at the end. I remembered a day in the hospital, 2 weeks before she died. She had been delirious, heavily medicated. She had grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Check the safe. Lucy," she had whispered. "Check the blue binder." I had assumed she was talking about her recipes or her will. I had told her not to worry. I had told her I would handle everything. I never found a blue binder. I had assumed it was a hallucination. Now, cruising at 65 miles per hour. I wondered if I had missed the first clue. I arrived at my apartment building in Morro Bay just as the sun was setting. It was a modern complex, glass and steel, impersonal and clean. I liked it. It had no ghosts. I checked my mailbox in the lobby. Nothing yet. The courier must be coming tomorrow. I went up to my unit, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. My phone sat on the table. I had a contact, Hannah Voss. We had worked together at an insurance firm right out of college. She was brilliant, cynical, and now worked in compliance for a regional bank. She knew how money moved when people wanted to hide it. I picked up the phone. I hesitated. If I made this call, I was crossing a line. I was acknowledging that my family was not just dysfunctional, but potentially corrupt. I was acknowledging that my father was not just a disappointed patriarch, but a liar. I took a sip of wine. I thought about Grant's smug face. "I will make sure you are taken care of." I unlocked the phone and found Hannah's number. I was not going to be taken care of. I was going to take care of myself. I pressed call. It rang 3 times. "Phillips?" Hannah's voice was raspy. She was a smoker. "I haven't heard from you in months. Everything okay?" "Hey, Hannah," I said, "I need to ask you a hypothetical question." "I love hypotheticals," she said. "They are usually the most honest questions people ask." "Shoot." If a construction company that prides itself on being family-owned suddenly has liens on its equipment and a refinancing deal with a no-name LLC, what does that usually mean? There was a pause, the sound of a lighter clicking. "It means they are bleeding out," Hannah said, "and they are using Band-Aids to stop a hemorrhage." "Who are we talking about?" I looked out at the city. "Just a story I'm writing." I said. "Uh-huh," Hannah said. She didn't believe me. "Well, in your story, tell the protagonist to check the covenants. If there is silent money, there are always strings attached. And when the money runs out, the strings turn into nooses." "Thanks, Hannah." I hung up. The strings turn into nooses. I went back inside and locked the balcony door. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I was done being the good daughter. The good daughter was a victim. Tomorrow, the notice would arrive, and tomorrow, I would start pulling on the strings. I washed my face, brushing my teeth with mechanical precision. I looked at myself in the mirror. Same brown eyes, same jawline as my father, but something behind the eyes had shifted. The softness was gone. I went to bed, and for the first time in years, I did not dream about saving my family. I dreamed about an empty house, a locked cabinet, and the sound of a structure collapsing under its own weight. The next morning, the courier arrived at 10 in the morning. He required a signature. I signed my name, Lucy Phillips. The envelope was thick, heavy. The return address was Vance Associates, attorneys at law. I took it to my kitchen table. I used a letter opener to slice the top. Inside was a single document on heavy cream-colored paper. Notice of potential breach and request for affirmation. I started reading. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear enough to stop my heart. It referenced an investment agreement dated October 14, 2015. Conditions regarding the succession of management and the protection of designated beneficiaries, failure to adhere to Section 4.2 regarding the distribution of estate assets. And then, A line that made me drop the paper onto the table. Such breach shall trigger the immediate repayment of the principal sum of $5,100,000. $5,100,000. I stared at the number, $5.1 million, and below it, explicitly named as a party with standing to enforce the beneficiary clause, Lucy Eleanor Phillips. I sat back in my chair. My father had not just disinherited me, he had violated a $5 million contract to do it, and someone was watching. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number on the letterhead. "This is Lucy Phillips," I said when the receptionist answered. "I received your notice. I would like to speak to Eleanor Vance. Please hold," the voice said. I waited. The line clicked. "Ms. Phillips," a smooth, calm voice said. "This is Eleanor Vance. I know about the money." I said. I was bluffing. Mostly. I knew the amount, but I didn't know the source. "I assumed you might—" "Ms. Vance said. "Why am I named in this?" I asked. "Why does an investor care if I get the estate or not?" "Ms. Vance paused. "Because, Ms. Phillips, the investment was contingent on you not being excluded. Your father signed that agreement 10 years ago. He took the money. And he agreed to the terms. Yesterday. He broke them." I closed my eyes. "What happens now?" I asked. "Ms. Vance's voice was devoid of emotion. "Now? Now we begin the process of recovering the funds. Unless, of course, the breach is cured." "Cured? Fixed, Ms. Phillips. Unless your father fixes it, or unless you decide to leverage your position." "Leverage it how?" "That is up to you. But I suggest you get a lawyer, because this is about to get very ugly. Very fast." I hung up. I looked at the document. I was the safeguard. I was the poison pill. My father had gambled $5 million that I would stay quiet, stay sweet, and stay out of the way. He had bet against me. I picked up the document and folded it carefully. He was going to lose. The document sat on my kitchen counter like a radioactive isotope. I had read it a dozen times. But the legalese was a dense thicket designed to keep people like me out. I needed a translator. I needed someone who spoke the language of hidden money and quiet leverage. I called Hannah Voss. We met at a wine bar in downtown Morro Bay, a place with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs that hummed with a low, electric buzz. Hannah was already there, nursing a glass of Pinot Noir. She looked exactly as I remembered from our days in the insurance trenches. Sharp blazer, hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. "You look like you have seen a ghost," Hannah said as I slid into the booth opposite her. "I feel like I'm being haunted," I said, "but not by a ghost. By a contract." I ordered a water. I needed a clear head. I tried to frame my questions as casual curiosity, the way I had rehearsed in the car. I told her I was working on a consulting project for a client who was dealing with a complex family business structure. I kept the names out of it. I kept my father out of it. But Hannah had known me for 5 years. She watched my hands, which were trembling slightly as I unwrapped the straw. "Cut the consulting act." "Lucy," she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register. "Is this about Barlow Ridge?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," Hannah said. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You asked about silent partnerships. In my world. In compliance. We call them the invisible hand. They are not just investors. Lucy, they are the true owners. Explain it to me," I said, like I am 5 years old. Hannah traced the rim of her glass. "A silent partner puts up capital when a company cannot get it from a bank. Maybe the company is leveraged to the hilt. Maybe they have a credit rating that smells like sulfur. The partner steps in with cash. In exchange, they get equity, usually non-voting, so the family, or the founder, keeps their ego intact. They get to pretend they are still the king. That sounds like a loan." I said, "It is not a loan," Hannah corrected. "It is equity, but it comes with covenants, strict ones." "Covenants?" "Rules," she said. "Conditions, ironclad promises. If the company breaches a covenant, the sleeping giant wakes up, and the giant is usually angry." What kind of covenants? I asked. Financial ratios. Mostly, she said, keeping a certain amount of cash on hand, not taking on more debt, but also governance promises, reporting honesty, and almost always, succession clauses. Succession? I asked. The word felt like a stone in my throat. Hannah nodded. Silent partners bet on the jockey, not just the horse. If the founder steps down, or dies, or tries to hand the reins to an idiot son, the partner can pull the plug. They can demand immediate repayment of the principal. They can force a sale. They can liquidate the assets. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Withdraw support instantly? I asked. Instantly. Hannah confirmed. It is called a clawback provision. If the company violates the terms, the money is not an investment anymore. It is a debt, and it is due yesterday. I sat back, the noise of the bar fading into a dull roar. My father had announced the estate transfer 2 nights ago. He had handed the reins to Grant, and within 24 hours, a law firm was calling me. Hannah was watching me closely. If your father took silent money. Lucy, she said softly, he is not driving the car. He is just holding the steering wheel while someone else works the pedals. And if he made a move without their permission, he just drove the whole family off a cliff. I went back to my apartment. The courier package was still on the counter. I opened it again, but this time, I read it with Hannah's voice in my head. Notice of potential breach. I scanned the paragraphs. The language was precise, clinical, and terrifying. Regarding the Master Investment Agreement dated October 14th, 2015, breach of Section 7, Paragraph C, relating to succession conduct and material misrepresentation. Succession conduct. That was it. The announcement. Dale had tried to move the assets to Grant. He had tried to change the jockey. But there was another phrase that caught my eye. One I had skimmed over in my initial panic. Failure to maintain the covenants regarding the protected parties as outlined in Addendum B. Protected parties. Plural. Or maybe singular. I looked at the cover letter again. It was addressed to me. Ms. Lucy Phillips. Why was I getting this? If this was about Dale and Grant, why was the investor contacting the daughter who had been cut out? Unless my exclusion was the breach. I picked up my phone. It was late, nearly 7 in the evening. But lawyers like this did not work 9 to 5. I dialed the number for Vance and Associates again. This time, when the receptionist answered, I did not ask for a callback. I am holding a notice of breach regarding Barlow Ridge Development. I said, my voice steady. I need to speak to Eleanor Vance. Now. I was put on hold for 30 seconds. Then, the line clicked. Ms. Phillips, Eleanor Vance said. Her voice was smooth, polished, and utterly unreadable. I assume you have reviewed the documents. I have. I said, I want to know who your client is. I cannot disclose that. She said, confidentiality is part of the agreement. Then tell me why I am involved. I said, my father told me the business is his. He told me the estate is his to give. He gave it to my brother. Why are you sending me legal notices? There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of typing. Your father is taking actions that may trigger immediate withdrawal of our client's capital, Vance said carefully. The agreement he signed includes specific stipulations regarding the management of the company and the disposition of the estate. And, I pressed, and, Vance continued, your name appears in the original documentation, specifically in the addendum regarding risk mitigation. I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. Risk mitigation? You are listed as a protected party. Ms. Phillips, the words hung in the air. Protected party. It sounded like something from a witness protection program, or a custody battle. Why? I asked. Why would a secret investor protect me? I have never met them. I did not even know they existed until yesterday. Vance's voice softened. Just a fraction. It was the first crack in her professional armor. That is a question for your father, she said. But I can tell you this. The condition of the investment was not just financial, it was structural. Our client wanted to ensure that the assets of Barlow Ridge were not misappropriated, and they viewed your position in the family as a metric of that stability. My position? I asked. I have no position. I am the one who brings the potato salad to the picnic. Exactly, Vance said. And if that changes, if you are removed from the board, or the will, or the estate, it signals a shift in the company's ethical standing. Your father's announcement regarding your brother was a material change. It triggered the alarm. My stomach dropped. I felt a wave of nausea. So, I whispered, I am the tripwire. We prefer the term safeguard. Vance said, but yes, if your father persists in this course of action, he forfeits the $5.1 million, and given the company's current liquidity, I imagine that would be catastrophic. I ended the call. I sat in my kitchen, the silence pressing in on me. I was not just a disappointed daughter, I was a contractual obligation. My father had not just betrayed me, he had monetized me. He had used my presence in the will as collateral to secure a fortune, and then, in his arrogance, he had forgotten that I was the key to the vault. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he just thought he could outsmart them. I grabbed my keys. I could not stay in Marrow Bay. I needed to see their faces. I needed to see Grant. The drive to Alder Creek was a blur of high beams and dark roads. I arrived just after 9 o'clock. The house was lit up like a lantern. I parked on the street, not wanting to block the driveway. I walked up the path, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. I did not knock. I used my key. The house smelled of scotch and cigars. Dale and Grant were in the living room. They looked up as I entered. Dale was in his armchair, a glass in his hand. Grant was pacing by the fireplace. They both froze. Lucy? Grant said. What are you doing here? I ignored him. I looked at my father. Who is the investor? Dad? I asked. Dale's face went rigid. He took a slow sip of his drink. Go home. Lucy, you are hysterical. I walked further into the room. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, the one Mom had bought on their 20th anniversary. I spoke to Eleanor Vance. I said, the name hit them like a physical blow. Grant stopped pacing. Dale set his glass down, missing the coaster. It clinked loudly against the wood table. You? You spoke to who? Grant asked. His voice was high, tight. The attorney for your silent partner. I said, the one holding the note for $5.1 million. The one who says that if you cut me out of the estate, the money disappears. Grant looked at Dale. Dad? She knows? Shut up, Grant, Dale hissed. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. You have no right to meddle in this business. Lucy. I am not meddling, I shouted. I am the collateral. They told me I am a protected party. You used me. Dad, you used my name to get that money. What did you tell them? That I was the heir? That I was the future? I told them what they needed to hear. Dale roared. Standing up, he looked old. Suddenly, the bluster was there, but the foundation was shaking. I needed that capital to save the company. The market crashed. We were going under. I did what I had to do to keep this roof over your head. And now? I asked. Now you give everything to Grant, and you think they won't notice? Grant stepped forward. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a sharp, barking sound. It was too loud. It was the laugh of a man who is terrified. You are paranoid. Lucy, he said, you are listening to lawyers who just want to squeeze fees out of us. There is no breach. Dad has a plan. Does he? I asked. I looked at Grant. I really looked at him. He was sweating. His collar was unbuttoned, his tie loose. He looked like a child wearing his father's suit. How much do you know? Grant? I asked quietly. Do you even know where the money went? Grant's smile faltered. He glanced at the floor. It is complicated. He mumbled, It is not complicated. I said, It is theft, or fraud, or both. Grant looked up, and for the first time, I saw the fear naked on his face. It was not the fear of losing money. It was the fear of being exposed. How much did she tell you? Grant asked. His voice was a whisper. About the addendum? Everything. I lied. Grant flinched. Dale slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he shouted. Lucy, Get out of my house. This is a business matter. You are not in the business. I looked at my father. He was shaking. I am the business. Dad, I said, without me, you are bankrupt. I turned and walked out. I did not wait for a response. I did not want to hear their excuses. I did not go back to Marrow Bay. I checked into the Motel 6 on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. I sat on the bed, staring at the textured ceiling. I could not sleep. My mind was racing. I needed proof. The lawyer's word was good, but documents were better. The next morning, I drove to the Barlow Ridge office. It was a single-story brick building on the outskirts of town. Near the lumber yard, I parked in the visitor lot. I walked in. The receptionist, a young girl named Kelly, looked up. She looked surprised to see me. "Hi, Lucy," she said. Is everything okay?" I smiled. It felt tight. "Fine. Kelly, just here to grab some of Mom's old things from the storage closet. Dad said it was okay." She hesitated. Usually, she would wave me through, but today, she glanced at the closed door of Dale's office. "Mr. Phillips is in a meeting," she said, "and Grant is on a call. I won't bother them," I said. I breezed past her desk before she could stop me. The office atmosphere was heavy. It felt like a funeral home. The phones were not ringing. Two of the project managers were standing by the coffee machine, talking in hushed tones. They stopped abruptly when they saw me. "Morning," I said. They nodded, looking down at their cups. Tense, I walked down the hallway. I passed Dale's executive assistant's desk. Mrs. Higgins. She had been with the company for 20 years. She was typing furiously, but her eyes were red and puffy. She looked like she had been crying. "Lucy," she said, her voice cracking. "Hi, Mrs. Higgins." She looked at me with a mixture of tragedy and fear. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "About everything." I stopped. "What do you mean?" She shook her head, glancing at Dale's door. "Just be careful, honey. It is a mess. It is all a mess." I continued to the back of the office, to the conference room where we kept the shared electronics. There was a family tablet there, an old iPad we used to show blueprints to clients. Grant used it for site visits. I hoped he had been careless. Grant was always careless. I slipped into the conference room and closed the door. I found the tablet on the charging dock. I pressed the home button. It prompted for a passcode. I tried Grant's birthday. It unlocked. I went to the mail app. It was logged into Grant's company email. I scrolled. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I found a thread from 2 weeks ago. Subject line: announcement timing. I opened it. It was between Grant and Dale. "Dad," Grant had written, "we need to make the move before the quarter close. If we wait until April, the auditors will see the cash flow gap. If I have the estate titles, I can leverage the land for a bridge loan to pay the interest to the partner." Dale's reply was short. "Agreed, but we have to keep Lucy out of the operating agreement. If she sees the books, she will ask about the monthly payments to the LLC. We announce at dinner, shock and awe. She will fold. She always folds." I read the line again. She always folds. They were banking on my passivity. They were banking on the version of Lucy who cooked Thanksgiving dinner and remembered birthdays and never caused a scene. I scrolled down. There was another email, dated 3 days ago, from Grant to Dale. Subject: the clause. "Dad, what about the safeguard clause? If the lawyers check the addendum, they will see her name. We need to amend the operating agreement to define family member as active employee so we can bypass her standing." Dale's reply: "I am working on it. Just get her to agree to the disinheritance. If she accepts it publicly, we can argue she waived her rights to the protection." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It was not hot. It was absolute zero. They were not just cutting me out. They were engineering a legal trap to strip me of the protection the investor had given me. They wanted me to agree to my own erasure so they could keep the money. I did not forward the emails. That would leave a digital trail. I took my phone out, I took photos of the screen, every email, every timestamp, every header. I scrolled further back. I found spreadsheets attached to emails from the accountant. I opened them. I took photos of the profit and loss statements. I saw the line item. Consulting fees. Obsidian Capital. $10,000 a month. Every month. For 10 years. That was the interest. $120,000 a year. Flowing out of the company to a silent partner, disguised as consulting fees. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly closed the mail app, wiped the screen with my sleeve, and set the tablet back on the dock. The door opened. It was Grant. He stopped when he saw me. His face went pale, then red. "What are you doing?" he asked. I turned, forcing my face to be blank, just looking for Mom's old recipe book. I thought maybe it ended up in the break room boxes. Grant stared at me. He looked at the tablet. He looked back at me. "It is not here," he said. "Okay," I said. I walked past him. "Lucy," he said. I stopped in the doorway. "Don't do anything stupid," he said. I looked at him. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in 2 days, and it felt like baring my teeth. "I am just looking for recipes." "Grant," I said. "I am just the daughter who cooks, remember?" I walked out of the office. I walked past Mrs. Higgins, past the tense project managers, past Kelly. I got into my car. I had the notice. I had the name of the lawyer. And now, I had the evidence of conspiracy. They wanted a war? They wanted to treat me like a liability? Fine. I was going to be the most expensive liability they had ever met. I drove back toward the highway. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was going to document. I was going to file. And I was going to burn their little house of cards to the ground. One piece of paper at a time. Elise Marin's office was not in a high-rise. It was tucked into the second floor of a renovated brownstone in the historic district of Morro Bay, smelling faintly of old paper and expensive coffee. Elise herself was small, sharp-featured, and possessed a stillness that made me feel like I was fidgeting even when I was sitting perfectly still. I had laid everything out on her desk. The courier notice from Vance and Associates, the photos I had taken of the emails on Grant's tablet, the public records showing the liens and the refinancing with Obsidian Capital. Elise read through them in silence. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, her eyes scanning the dense legal text of the notice. Finally, she looked up. "This is a mess," she said. "I know." I said, "That is why I'm here. My father says the estate is his to give. He says I am just being emotional. But this notice says I am a protected party in a $5.1 million deal." Elise leaned back in her chair. "Lucy," she said. Her voice measured. "You need to understand something about estates. People think an estate is a collection of things, a house, a cabin, a bank account. But often, an estate is just a net value, and if the debts outweigh the assets, the estate is an illusion." She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. "Your father is moving the assets to your brother." She continued, "That part is clear. But if the assets are leveraged, if the house is collateral for a business loan, if the cabin is tied up in a trust that guarantees a debt, then he is not giving your brother a gift. He is giving him a grenade, and I am the pin." I said. Elise nodded slowly. "Precisely. This silent partner, whoever they are, put money in because they believed the structure of the family would keep the company stable. You were the stability. Your father removing you changes the risk profile. That is why they are calling the loan." "What do I do?" I asked. "Do I sue?" "Not yet," Elise said. "Litigation is a sledgehammer. Right now, you need a scalpel. We need to verify what is real. We know about the liens. We know about the silent partner. But we do not know the terms of the original loan. We do not know what your father promised them 10 years ago." She handed the papers back to me. "Go find the source," she said. "Dig into the history. If your mother was the bookkeeper, she left a trail. People who keep secrets always leave a trail because they are terrified they will forget the lie." I drove straight from Elise's office to the U-Store IT facility on the outskirts of Morro Bay. My parents had rented a unit there for 20 years. A place to dump the overflow of a life that was constantly expanding. Old furniture, boxes of tax returns, my childhood toys. I had the key on my ring. It was a small brass key I had taken from the hook in the kitchen pantry 3 years ago, after Mom died, thinking I might need to retrieve some photo albums. I had never used it. The metal door rolled up with a screeching protest of rusted springs. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of cardboard and dust. I pulled the string for the single light bulb. The yellow light illuminated a canyon of boxes. I started with the filing cabinets in the back. They were locked, but the keys were taped to the back of the metal casing, a trick Mom had taught me when I was 10. So we never lose them. Lucy, I opened the top drawer. It was full of mundane things. Warranties for appliances long since broken. Instruction manuals. I moved to the second drawer. This one was labeled personal. Eleanor. My heart skipped a beat. I thumbed through the folders. Medical records, knitting patterns, correspondence with her sister in Ohio, and then, at the very back, a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy tape. On the front, in my mother's distinct, looping cursive, were the words, "For Lucy, if things get ugly." I sat down on a dusty ottoman. My hands were shaking. If things get ugly, she knew. She had known for years. I used my car keys to slice the tape. Inside was a letter, written on her personal stationery, and a stack of photocopied documents. I picked up the letter first. My dearest Lucy, if you are reading this, it means Dale has done something foolish. I love your father, but his ambition has always been bigger than his caution. He sees the world as something he can bend to his will, and he forgets that money has its own gravity. 10 years ago, he wanted to expand into the commercial sector. The banks said no. We were already stretched too thin, but Dale wouldn't listen. He found a private investor, a group called Obsidian. I begged him not to take the money. I told him it felt like a trap. He did it anyway. He forged my signature on the initial inquiry. I only found out when the first check arrived. He promised me it was temporary. He promised me he would pay them back in 2 years. But the business ate the money. Lucy. It just swallowed it whole. He made me promise to keep it quiet. He said if the town knew we needed outside money, our reputation would be ruined. He said it was for the family, but I made him sign a side agreement. I made the investors include a clause that protected you, because I knew. Lucy, I knew that if things got tight, Dale would sacrifice whatever he had to in order to save the name, and I was terrified he would sacrifice you. I am sorry I was not strong enough to stop him. I am sorry I left you with this mess. Love, Mom. I wiped a tear from my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of validation. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. I had been right to feel the cold draft in the house all these years. I turned to the documents. There was a photocopy of a contract, Master Capital Injection Agreement. The date matched the one in the lawyer's notice. I flipped to the back. There was a page titled Addendum B, Safeguard Provisions. But the bottom half of the page was gone. It had been torn off. The jagged edge of the paper cut right through a sentence. In the event that the primary beneficiary acts to. I cursed. The key section, the part that detailed exactly what my leverage was, it was missing, but I had enough. I had the admission. I had the history. I had the fact that my mother, the woman who never raised her voice, had been terrified enough to hide a time bomb in a storage unit. I put the papers back in the envelope. I stood up. I was going to Alder Creek. The drive was 2 hours of simmering silence. I did not listen to music. I rehearsed the conversation in my head. I anticipated Dale's deflection. I anticipated his anger. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was dipping below the tree line. The house was casting long shadows across the lawn. I found Dale in the kitchen. He was making a sandwich. It was such a mundane act for a man who was living in the center of a financial hurricane. "Lucy," he said, not looking up. "I thought I told you to stay in Marrow Bay." I put the letter on the counter, right next to his plate. "Mom left this for me." I said. Dale froze. He looked at the envelope. He recognized the handwriting. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was quiet. "The storage unit." I said, "She hid it, because she knew you would burn it if you found it." Dale wiped his hands on a dish towel. He picked up the letter. He read it standing up. I watched his face. I expected guilt. I expected shame. Instead, his face hardened. He crumpled the letter in his fist. "She had no right." He muttered, "No right?" I asked. "She was your wife. She was the bookkeeper. She was the one you forced to lie for 10 years. "I didn't force her," Dale shouted. He threw the crumpled ball of paper onto the floor. "I did what I had to do. I saved this family. You took a loan you couldn't pay back," I yelled. "And you used Mom's name to do it. And then you used my name to secure it. That is what the side agreement was, wasn't it? You traded my future for $5.1 million. Dale slammed his hand on the counter. The plates rattled. "You do not understand business," he roared. "It is leverage. It is all leverage. I needed that money to build the Riverview project. If I hadn't taken it, we would be living in a rental right now. I put food on this table. I paid for your college. I paid for your car. And this is how you repay me? By digging up bones to punish me? I am not punishing you." I said, my voice shaking, "I am trying to stop you from destroying everything. The investor is calling the loan. Dad, they know you cut me out. They know you broke the deal. Let them call it," Dale said, his face red. "I will handle them. I always handle them." "How?" I asked. "Do you have $5 million in cash lying around? Or are you going to use the equity in the house? Oh, wait, the house is leveraged too, isn't it?" Dale looked at me with pure venom. "You sound just like her," he spat, always afraid, always looking at the cost instead of the value. I stared at him. He was talking about Mom. "She was afraid because she loved you," I said quietly, "and she was afraid because she knew you would eventually drive us off a cliff." "Get out," Dale said. He turned his back to me. "Get out of my kitchen." I walked out. I felt hollowed out. There was no reaching him. He was locked inside a fortress of his own delusion. I made it to the front porch before the door opened behind me. It was Grant. He stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. The evening air was cold. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" Grant said. I turned to face him. He looked tired. The cocky shine from the dinner announcement was gone. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. "He is delusional." "Grant," I said, "he thinks he can just talk his way out of a $5 million debt." Grant leaned against the railing. He crossed his arms. "The company is in trouble." "Lucy," he said. He didn't shout. He just stated it like a fact. "I know." I said, "We have payroll on Friday." Grant said, "We have 40 employees, guys with families, guys with mortgages. If the investor pulls the money, the operating accounts freeze, checks bounce, the job sites shut down." He looked at me. His eyes were dark. "If you keep pushing this, if you keep stirring up the lawyers, you are going to be the reason those guys lose their jobs." I felt the familiar twist in my gut, the guilt hook. It was the same hook they had used when I wanted to go to art school instead of business school. "Think of the family. That is not on me." "Grant," I said, "that is on you." "And Dad, you signed the deal. You spent the money. You are the trigger," Grant said. He took a step toward me. The lawyer said it. "You are the trigger. If you just calm down, if you just sign a waiver saying you support the estate transfer, if you just tell the investor that you are fine with it, they might back off. They might give us an extension." I looked at him. He was asking me to sign away my inheritance, my protection, and my dignity, just to buy them a few more months of pretending everything was fine. "And if I don't?" I asked. Grant's face twisted. It wasn't anger. It was desperation disguised as authority. "Then the town will know," he said. "Everyone in Alder Creek will know that Lucy Phillips destroyed her father's business because she didn't get a piece of the pie. You think you can walk down Main Street after that? You think you can visit Mom's grave without people staring at you? It sounded like responsibility, but it was a threat. I looked at my brother. I remembered teaching him how to tie his shoes. I remembered him crying when he scraped his knee. I realized something then, something that clicked into place like a heavy lock. My family had trained me to be the emotional landfill. They dumped their anxiety, their risks, and their guilt onto me. And because I loved them, I buried it. I composted it. I turned it into forgiveness. But this was too toxic to bury. I am not doing this. Grant, I said, I am not carrying this for you. You are selfish. Grant sneered. Maybe, I said, or maybe I am just full. I walked down the steps to my car. Grant didn't follow me. He just stood on the porch, a silhouette against the lighted window, watching me leave. I drove a mile down the road and pulled into the parking lot of the desolate community park. I needed to stop shaking before I got on the highway. My phone rang. It was a block number. I answered it. Ms. Phillips, the voice said. It was Eleanor Vance. I am listening. I said, I have spoken with my client. Vance said, they are not satisfied with your father's response to our notice. He sent a letter claiming the estate transfer is internal administrative restructuring. He thinks we are stupid. He thinks everyone is stupid. I said, we are issuing a formal demand. Vance said, we are giving Barlow Ridge 10 days to prove compliance with the succession clause. If they cannot prove that you retain your protected status, or that the estate assets remain unencumbered, we will initiate the clawback. The $5.1 million will be due in full. 10 days. I repeated, 10 days. Vance confirmed. However, I waited. My client is aware that this puts you in a difficult position. Vance said, the addendum that, unfortunately, has been partially obscured in your father's copy, gives you certain rights. I found a copy. I said, but the bottom was torn off. Vance made a sound that might have been a dry chuckle. Of course it was. Well, Ms. Phillips, let me fill in the blank. The missing section states that in the event of a breach involving your disinheritance, you have the right to demand an independent audit of the company's books to determine the true value of your share. An audit? I asked. A full forensic accounting. Vance said, if you file a request for that audit, it freezes the company's ability to move assets. It stops the estate transfer dead in the tracks. It forces them to open the books. And if I do that? I asked. If you do that, Vance said, you are lighting a fuse. Your father will not be able to hide the debt anymore. The creditors will see it. The bank will see it. The company might implode. But, I asked, I knew there was a but. But, Vance said, it is the only way to prove what the company is actually worth. And it is the only way to force your father to the table. If you want to save anything, or if you just want the truth, you have to be willing to break the illusion. I closed my eyes. I thought about the employees Grant had mentioned. I thought about the town. But then I thought about Mom's letter. He promised me it was temporary. He had been lying for 10 years. If I let this go, he would lie for 10 more. He would drag Grant down with him. He would drain the retirement accounts of those employees to pay the interest. The crash was coming. The only choice I had was whether I wanted to be in the car when it hit the wall or standing outside directing traffic. I will do it, I said. Good, Vance said. You need to send a formal demand for accounting. Cite Section 8 of the Uniform LLC Act. Your attorney can help you draft it. I don't have an attorney, I started to say, then stopped. I did. I had a lease. I will handle it. I said, Ms. Phillips? Vance said. Just before hanging up. Yes? Your mother was a smart woman. She knew this day would come. Do not let her foresight go to waste. The line went dead. I sat in the dark car. The park was silent. I called Elise Marin. It was late, but she picked up on the second ring. Draft the letter. Elise, I said. Which letter? She asked. The demand for accounting. I said, I want to see the books. I want to see every dime. Are you sure? Elise asked. Once we send this, there is no going back. This is a declaration of war. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 8:15. They declared war on me when they decided I was disposable. I said, I am just returning fire. Send it. Lucy? Elise asked. Send it. I said. I hung up. I started the car. The engine roared to life. I was done being the peacekeeper. I was done being the reliable one who smoothed over the cracks. I was going to be the earthquake. The phone became a physical object of dread. It sat on my coffee table like a coiled snake, vibrating with a persistence that felt manic. My father did not just call, he besieged me. For 3 days after I sent the demand for accounting. Dale Phillips alternated between two distinct personalities, switching between them with a fluidity that made me question my own sanity. At 9 a.m, he was the heartbroken patriarch. Lucy, honey, he would say, his voice thick with a manufactured tremor. I did this to protect you. You do not know the burden of this business. It is a grinder. I wanted you to have a soft life. I wanted you to be free of the mud and the concrete. Why are you fighting my love? By noon, the tenderness would curdle into rage. You are embarrassing this family, he would shout, the distortion of the speakerphone unable to hide the spit flying from his lips. I built this from nothing. I scraped the dirt with my own fingernails. And you sit there in your air-conditioned apartment and throw legal grenades at your own blood? You are ungrateful. You are rotten. Lucy. I stopped answering. I let the voicemails pile up, a digital archive of his unraveling. I listened to them only once, transcribing the threats and the pleas into a notebook, dating and timing each one. My hand cramped as I wrote, but I forced myself to capture every word. Protect you, destroy you, love you, disown you. It was emotional whiplash, designed to break my resolve. He was betting that the daughter who had always smoothed things over would eventually crack under the pressure of his disappointment. He was betting that I would pick up the phone and apologize just to make the noise stop. But silence is a powerful shield. I kept the phone on silent and turned my face toward the facts. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. I was sitting at my kitchen island, picking at a salad I had no appetite for, when my laptop chimed. New email. The sender was a string of random alphanumeric characters from a generic, encrypted service. The subject line was blank. I hovered the cursor over the message. My first instinct was malware. My second instinct was that someone inside Barlow Ridge was watching the walls close in. I opened it. There was no text in the body of the email. Just 3 attachments, Excel spreadsheets. I downloaded them to an external hard drive, disconnected from the internet, and opened the first file. It was a cash flow report for the last 12 months, but it was not the clean version they would show a bank. It was the raw feed. I saw column G, restricted funds, escrow. These were deposits from clients, down payments on custom builds that were legally required to be held in trust until construction milestones were met. To touch that money for anything else was illegal. It was theft. I traced the rows. On February 3rd, $50,000 moved from escrow to general operating. On March 15th, another $75,000 moved. The memo line for the transfer read, Vendor payout, emergency. I opened the second file. It was a budget breakdown for the new commercial park project, the one Dale claimed was the company's crown jewel. The numbers didn't add up. The projected cost of materials was listed at 40% below market rate. The labor costs were slashed in half. I realized what I was looking at. They had massaged the budget numbers to artificially inflate the projected profit margin. Why? To satisfy a debt service coverage ratio. To keep the bank, or the silent partner, from calling a default. I called Hannah Voss immediately. I need you to look at something. I said, I am sending you a file. Tell me if I am reading this right. I waited on the line while the file transferred. I heard Hannah clicking her mouse. Then silence. A long, heavy silence. Lucy, Hannah said. Her voice was devoid of its usual cynical humor. This is a Ponzi scheme. What? I asked. Not literally, she said, but functionally. They are using client deposits to pay operating costs. They are robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Paul is a loan shark, and Peter is about to file a lawsuit. Look at the debt ratio. I said, I see it. Hannah said, they cooked the books to keep the ratio above 1.2. If they hadn't, the covenants would have triggered 6 months ago. So they are already in breach? I asked. Hannah let out a low whistle. Breach? Lucy, if an auditor saw this, your father wouldn't just lose the company. He could go to jail. Misusing escrow funds is a felony. I stared at the screen. The numbers blurred. A felony. Dale wasn't just trying to save his reputation. He was trying to stay out of prison. And the silent partner, I asked? The silent partner is the only thing keeping the lights on, Hannah said. That $5.1 million isn't an investment anymore. It is a brace holding a broken leg together. If that money goes, the leg snaps. And with these escrow violations, the patient dies on the table. I thanked her and hung up. I went back to the documents. I opened the third file. It was a collection of scanned PDFs, invoices, contracts, and then I saw it. It was a change order for a supplier, dated 3 months ago, a standard document, but the signature at the bottom caught my eye. Dale Phillips. But it wasn't Dale's signature. I knew my father's signature better than my own. It was a sharp, aggressive scrawl with a distinct loop on the P. This signature was smoother, rounder. It looked like Grant's handwriting, trying to look like Dale's. I looked closer. Below the signature, in tiny print, was a checked box. POA on file. Power of attorney. I searched the public records database again. I looked for filings under Dale Phillips. I found it. A durable power of attorney document filed 4 months ago. It granted Grant Phillips full authority to sign for Dale in all financial and legal matters in the event of incapacity or unavailability. 4 months ago. Dale had been golfing 4 months ago. I had seen the photos on Facebook. He wasn't incapacitated. So why was Grant signing documents using a POA that predated the estate announcement by months? If Grant had POA, then the estate transfer wasn't a gift. It was a shield. They were moving the assets to Grant not because he deserved them, but because they were trying to decouple the property from Dale's liability. If Dale went down for the escrow fraud, they wanted the house and the business to be in Grant's name, safe from the fallout. I wasn't just being cut out. I was being used as a distraction while they frantically tried to launder the liability. I needed to see Grant. Alone. I knew his routine. Grant liked to play the part of the executive. He went to a specific coffee shop in Alder Creek every morning at 8 to read the Wall Street Journal and pretend he understood global markets. I was waiting in the parking lot when he pulled up in his shiny black SUV. He didn't see me until I tapped on his window. He jumped, spilling coffee on his sleeve. He rolled down the window. "Jesus! Lucy!" he snapped. "You nearly gave me a heart attack. Unlock the door." "Grant?" I said. He hesitated, looking around to see if anyone was watching. Then he hit the unlock button. I climbed into the passenger seat. The car smelled of new leather and anxiety. "I know about the power of attorney," I said. Grant went still. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead through the windshield at the brick wall of the coffee shop. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Don't lie to me." I said, "I saw the filing. You have been signing for Dad for 4 months. Why? He isn't sick. He isn't in a coma. Why are you shielding him?" Grant gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. "He is not as strong as he looks." Grant whispered, "What does that mean?" "He had a spell." Grant said, 4 months ago, we were at the office. He just collapsed. The doctor said it was stress, a mini-stroke, a TIA. I felt a pang of concern, purely reflexive. "Dad? He's fine," Grant said quickly, but the doctor said he needed to reduce his load. He couldn't handle the daily pressure of the creditors, so I stepped up. I took the signature authority so he wouldn't have to deal with every little fire. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I am his daughter. I check in every week. Why did you let me believe he was fine?" Grant turned to me then. His face was twisted with a mixture of resentment and honesty. "Because if we told you, you would have come home," he said. "Of course I would have come home," I said, "and you would have taken over." Grant said, "You would have looked at the books. You would have seen the mess, and you would have tried to fix it your way." You would have sold the land. You would have fired the staff. You would have cut the family to the bone to save the balance sheet. I stared at him. You didn't hide it because you thought I was weak, I said, realizing the truth as I spoke the words. You hid it because you knew I was competent. Grant looked away. You are cold. Lucy, he said, you treat the business like a math problem. Dad treats it like a family member. We couldn't let you gut it just to make the numbers work. So instead, you let him commit felony fraud. I said. Grant flinched. I saw the escrow transfers. Grant, I said, I saw the spreadsheets. You are using client money to pay operating costs. That isn't saving the family. That is prison time. It is temporary, Grant hissed. As soon as the silent partner signs off on the renewal, we put the money back. No one gets hurt, unless the silent partner finds out. I said, or unless the sister you screwed over decides to hand those spreadsheets to the district attorney. Grant looked at me with horror. You wouldn't try me, I said. I opened the car door. You tell Dad to stop calling me, I said. Tell him to stop leaving voicemails about how much he loves me, because every time he lies to me, I get closer to sending that email. I got out of the car. Grant didn't move. He just sat there, gripping the wheel of a car he probably couldn't afford, driving a company that was technically insolvent, pretending he was the heir to a kingdom that was already burning. I drove back to Marrow Bay with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. I went straight to Elise Marin's office. I told her about the escrow funds. I told her about the power of attorney. Elise listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. This changes the leverage, she said. If they are shielding assets, the court can pierce the corporate veil. We can go after everything, but that takes time. We don't have time, I said. The 10-day window from the investor is closing. Elise opened a folder on her desk. I found something in the partial agreement you brought me, she said. I had a forensic document expert look at the tear. He couldn't reconstruct the text, obviously, but he recognized the boilerplate language leading up to it. And it is a family safeguard clause, Elise said. It is rare, but you see it in high-risk private equity. Basically, the investor knew your father was high risk. They knew he was prone to, let's call it, creative accounting. So they insisted on a clause that tied the investment to the stability of the heir structure, meaning me. I said, meaning you were the human collateral. Elise said, they didn't trust Dale. They trusted the idea that Dale wouldn't screw over his own daughter. They bet on his morality. They made a bad bet. I said. Elise smiled grimly, which is why they are calling the loan. But here's the interesting part. If you are a named safeguard, you have the right to communicate directly with the investor. You don't have to go through Dale. You don't have to go through Vance. You can request a face-to-face. I looked at the phone on her desk. Set it up, I said. The meeting was set for 2 days later. Neutral ground, a conference room in a shared workspace in downtown Marrow Bay. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wore a navy blazer and the most uncomfortable heels I owned. I wanted to feel sharp. Eleanor Vance arrived exactly on time. She was alone. Ms. Phillips, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for meeting me. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm, dry. You wanted to see me. I said, I did. Vance said. She sat down and placed a slim leather folder on the table. My client values discretion above all else. That is why we operate as a silent partner. But given the volatility of the situation, they authorized me to speak more plainly. Who are they? I asked. Vance shook her head. Names are not necessary, but motives are. She clasped her hands. My client did not invest $5.1 million in Barlow Ridge because they thought it was a gold mine. The construction margins were thin even 10 years ago. They invested because they believed your father owed a debt. A financial debt? I asked. A moral one, Vance said. I frowned. What kind of moral debt costs $5 million? The kind that involves your mother? Vance said. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My mother? I asked. Your mother approached my client 10 years ago, Vance said. She was desperate. She knew the company was failing. She knew Dale was taking risks that could leave you destitute. She asked for help. She asked for the money. She asked for a lifeline. Vance corrected. My client agreed, but only on the condition that your inheritance was irrevocable. They wanted to ensure that no matter how reckless Dale got, there would be a firewall around your share. Why? I asked. Why would a stranger care about me? Vance looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very old. Because your mother saved my client's reputation 20 years ago. Ms. Phillips. She was a bookkeeper. She saw something she shouldn't have at a previous firm. She could have exposed it. She could have ruined a life. Instead, she quietly fixed it. She showed grace where none was earned. I sat back, stunned. My mother, the quiet woman who knit blankets and baked casseroles, she had wielded power I never knew existed. My client feels they are repaying that grace by protecting her daughter. Vance said, that is why we are calling the loan. Not to destroy the company, but to stop your father from stealing your future. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I fought them back. If you call the loan, the company collapses. I said, Grant told me about the payroll, about the employees. That is the leverage, Vance said. Your father loves the company more than he loves the truth. If he thinks he will lose it, he might finally come to the table. But you have to hold the line. Lucy, you cannot fold. I am not folding. I said, good, Vance said. She stood up. Because the clock runs out in 4 days. The stress began to manifest physically. I stopped sleeping. I would lie in bed at 3 a.m, staring at the streetlights casting shadows on my ceiling, hearing my father's voice in the loop, ungrateful, rotten. My jaw ached constantly. I realized I was grinding my teeth, clamping down on words I wanted to scream. I found myself dissociating during the day. I would be in the middle of a conference call for my actual job, and suddenly the voices would sound like they were underwater. I would lose 5 minutes of time, staring at a spreadsheet, my mind replaying the image of the torn document in the storage unit. I made an appointment with a therapist, a woman named Dr. Aris. I sat on her couch, clutching a throw pillow. I feel like I'm being erased. I told her, my family is rewriting history to make me the villain, and the worst part is, I feel guilty. I feel like maybe I should just let them do it. Maybe it is my job to be the sacrifice. That is not a job. Doctor, Aris said gently, that is a role, and it is a role they cast you in without an audition. You are allowed to quit the play. Lucy, I don't want to become hard. I said, I don't want to become like them, bitter and transactional. You won't, she said. There is a difference between being hard and being clear. A diamond is clear. It is also the strongest thing on earth. Be a diamond. Lucy. 2 days later, Dale made his move. He didn't call. He didn't write. He threw a party. It was the annual Barlow Ridge Appreciation Luncheon. Usually, it was a quiet affair in the office break room. This year, he rented the banquet hall at the Alder Creek Country Club. He invited the mayor. He invited the suppliers. He invited the local press. I wasn't invited, but Mrs. Gable was. And Mrs. Gable texted me. He is making a speech. She wrote, you should know what he is saying. She sent a video clip. I watched it on my phone. The camera was shaky. Dale was standing at a podium, looking dapper in a navy suit. He looked healthy. He looked strong. The spell Grant had mentioned was nowhere to be seen. He put his arm around Grant. Grant is the future of Barlow Ridge, Dale boomed into the microphone. He has the vision. He has the grit. And I am proud to hand the torch to him. The crowd applauded. And I want to take a moment to mention my daughter. Lucy, Dale continued. The smile on his face was beatific. She couldn't be here today. She is so busy with her big city life in Marrow Bay. She has her own dreams, her own path. We are so proud of her independence. I stared at the screen. He was rewriting the narrative in real time. He was painting me as the distant, successful daughter who had chosen to leave. He was making my exclusion look like my idea. If I complained now, if I sued now, I would look like the greedy city girl coming back to snatch the hard-earned money from the faithful son. It was brilliant. It was evil. He was inoculating the town against the truth. I put the phone down. Be a diamond. I thought, clear, strong. I called Elise. File the request. I said, "Which one?" Elise asked. "The freeze." I said, "Request a temporary restraining order on all asset transfers. Cite the pending audit and the potential for dissipation of marital assets from Mom's estate." "Lucy," Elise warned, "this will be public. This will be on the court docket. The local paper will see it. It will contradict everything he just said at that luncheon." "I know." I said, "He will hate you for this." She said, "He already hates me." I said, "He just hates me in private. Now he can hate me in public." I hung up. I walked to my window and looked out at the city. I wasn't doing this to destroy the company. I wasn't doing this for the money. I was doing it because my mother had paid for a firewall with her silence, and I was the only one left to man the watchtower. I was freezing the assets. I was stopping the flow. I was forcing them to stop moving in the dark. And if the light burned them, that was their fault for living in the shadows. The silence in Alder Creek was louder than the noise. In a small town, hostility does not always manifest as shouting. Often, it manifests as a sudden, collective deafness. I walked into Miller's Market on a Tuesday morning to buy coffee and apples, and the conversation at the deli counter died instantly. 3 men in Carhartt jackets turned their backs to me: the cashier, a woman named Brenda, who had known me since I was in braces, scanned my items without meeting my eyes. "That will be $18, she said to the register. "Hi, Brenda," I said. She did not answer. She shoved the receipt into the bag and looked over my shoulder at the next customer. "Next," she called out, as if I had already vanished. I walked out to the parking lot, my cheeks burning. I saw a flyer stapled to the community corkboard near the exit. It was an advertisement for the Barlow Ridge Spring Sale, featuring a photo of Dale and Grant standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling like captains of industry. Someone had written in black marker across the bottom, "Support local. Don't let the city destroy us." The city, that was me. I was the invader. I felt the familiar, acidic rise of shame in my throat. It was the old reflex, the one trained into me by 30 years of walking on eggshells. I wanted to go back inside and apologize. I wanted to explain that I was not trying to hurt anyone, that I just wanted what was fair. I wanted to beg them to like me again. I stopped at my car door. I took a deep breath of the cold air. No, I was not the one lying to them. I was not the one using their down payments to pay off secret loans. I was not the one leveraging the town's economy on a fraudulent foundation. I got in the car and drove away. I did not speed. I did not hide. I drove down Main Street with my head up, refusing to let them shame me into submission. 2 days later, the full text of the investment agreement arrived. Elise Marin called me into her office to review it. She had finally compelled the production of the unredacted document through a court order attached to the asset freeze. We sat in her conference room. The document lay on the table between us, a thick stack of paper that cost $5.1 million. Read Section 4. Paragraph 2. Elise said. I turned the page. In the event that Dale Phillips removes, disinherits, or otherwise materially reduces the potential estate share of Lucy Eleanor Phillips without documented cause of criminal misconduct or incapacity, such action shall be considered a material breach. I read it again. It was explicit. My name was not just an addendum. It was the load-bearing wall of the entire contract. But why? I asked. Why were they so specific? Read the preamble to the section, Elise said. I looked up to the top of the page. Whereas the investor seeks to ensure remediation for past financial disparagement and injury caused by the principal, Dale Phillips, to the matriarch, Eleanor Phillips. And whereas the investor views the matriarch's daughter as the primary beneficiary of said remediation, I stopped reading. The room felt like it was spinning. Remediation for past financial injury. The silent partner did not just think Dale was risky. They knew he had stolen from my mother. They knew he had hurt her financially. perhaps drained her accounts or leveraged her personal assets against her will years ago. The $5.1 million was not just a loan, it was a penance. It was a structure designed to force Dale to build something that would eventually belong to me. As repayment for whatever he had taken from his wife, I wasn't just a daughter. I was the debt collector he didn't know he had. I closed the folder. I need to go to Alder Creek. I said, "Are you sure?" Elise asked. "You can handle this through letters now. You have the upper hand." I need to hear him say it. I said, "I need to know what he did to her." I found Dale in the greenhouse behind the main house. It was his sanctuary, a glass box filled with orchids and humid air. He was pruning a cattleya, his hands steady, his face serene. He looked like a man without a care in the world, despite the fact that his accounts were frozen and his reputation was cracking. I walked in. The smell of damp earth and fertilizer was overwhelming. "I have the agreement." "Dad?" I said. He didn't look up. He snipped a dead leaf. "Good for you," he said. "I assume you are proud of yourself. Grant tells me the bank is asking questions about the freeze. You are strangling the business. Lucy." I ignored his deflection. I read the preamble. I said, "The part about financial injury to Mom." Dale's hand slipped. The shears snipped a healthy bloom, which fell silently to the dirt floor. He turned slowly to face me. The serenity was gone. In its place was a look of exhausted bitterness. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "Try me." I said, "What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything to her," he snapped. "I did it for us. 20 years ago, I needed capital. The market was booming, and I was stuck with a shovel and a pickup truck. I wanted to build an empire. Your mother. She was so small. She was so afraid. She had this little inheritance from her aunt. Just sitting there, doing nothing. You stole her inheritance." I said, "I invested it," Dale shouted. "I put it into the business. And yes, we lost it. That first development failed. But I made it back, didn't I? I built this house. I put you through school. You lost her money." I said, "And when you needed more, you went to the silent partner, and they knew what you had done." Dale let out a harsh laugh. It was an ugly sound. "She told them," he said. He shook his head, looking at the orchids with disdain. "Your mother, the loyal wife. She went to them behind my back. She told them I was dangerous with money. She begged them to lock me down. She humiliated me. Lucy, she made me sign a contract that treated me like a child in my own company." He looked at me, his eyes wet with self-pity. "And she made you the warden," he said. "She put you in the contract so I would have to look at you every day and remember that I wasn't really in charge. That is why I cut you out. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand the ghost of her looking over my shoulder, checking my math, telling me I wasn't good enough." I stared at him. I looked for the monster. I looked for the villain. But I didn't see a monster. I saw a small, insecure man who had resented his wife for being smarter than him. He had resented her for saving him, and because he couldn't punish her anymore, he had decided to punish me. It wasn't about the business. "Dad," I said quietly, "it was just about your ego." "It is my name on the sign," he yelled. "I am the one who builds things. You are the one who digs holes." I said, "Mom was the one who poured the foundation, and now that she is gone, you are just collapsing into the dirt." I turned to leave. I couldn't look at him anymore. His confession wasn't a relief. It was deeply, profoundly disappointing. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a thief with a fragile pride. Grant was waiting for me in the driveway. He must have seen my car. He was pacing, checking his watch. "Lucy," he said, rushing up to me. "We need to talk. I don't have anything to say to you." "Grant." I said, "Please," he said. He grabbed my arm, then let go quickly when I glared at him. "Look, I know about the clause. Dad told me." "He told you he stole Mom's money?" I asked. "He told me it was complicated," Grant said, waving his hand. "The past is the past. We have to deal with right now. The investor is going to pull the plug in 3 days. "So?" I asked. "So, I have a proposal," Grant said. He licked his lips. He looked desperate. We split it. 50-50. I will rewrite the will. I will tear up the estate announcement. You get half the shares. You get half the assets. And? I asked. I knew there was a catch. And you go to the investor, Grant said. You go to them as the protected party. You tell them you are satisfied. You tell them the breach is cured. You tell them to renew the loan for another 5 years. I looked at him. He wanted me to use my status to lock us back into the debt. And what about the escrow funds? I asked. What about the fraud? We will fix it, Grant said. With the loan renewed, we can cash flow the projects. We can put the money back before the auditors come. I shook my head. You want me to be the fixer, I said. You want me to put my name on the line to cover up your crimes. If I tell the investor everything is fine, and then the escrow theft comes out, I am complicit. I go down with you. No, Lucy, it is not like that. Grant pleaded. It is about saving the legacy. There is no legacy. Grant, I said, it is a shell game. Dad built it on debt and lies. Why do you want it so bad? Because it is all I have, Grant shouted. The mask slipped. He looked like a terrified child. I don't have a degree like you. I don't have a career in the city. I have this. If this goes under, I am a 35-year-old man with nothing but a leased SUV and a last name that means failure. I felt a pang of pity for him. He was a victim of Dale's ego, too. He had been groomed to inherit a disaster. I can't do it, Grant. I said, I won't lie to the investor, and I won't let you drag me into prison. Then you are killing us, Grant said. His voice was cold. You are pulling the trigger. Maybe the gun was already fired. I said, and I am just refusing to stand in front of the bullet. I got in my car. I left him standing in the driveway, watching his inheritance evaporate. I drove back to Morro Bay, but my mind was stuck on one detail. Dale had said he invested Mom's money. He said he lost it on a development, but the silent partner agreement was from 10 years ago. The escrow theft was recent. Where was the money going now? The company was bleeding cash. Yes, but with $5.1 million in capital and constant project revenue, they shouldn't be resorting to stealing client deposits unless the money was leaking somewhere else. I called Eleanor Vance. I need to know something, I said when she answered. Ms. Phillips, Vance said, have you decided how you wish to proceed? Not yet, I said, but I need to know why your client is so convinced my father is siphoning value. You mentioned it in our first call. You said he was moving assets. He is, Vance said. We have tracked significant outflows from Barlow Ridge to a charitable entity. A charity? I asked. Dad hates charity. He says it is for people who can't work. It is called the Eleanor Phillips Foundation, Vance said. I nearly dropped the phone. He named it after Mom? It was established 3 years ago, shortly after her death. Vance said, ostensibly, it is a nonprofit dedicated to community arts, but our analysis shows that Barlow Ridge pays consulting fees and donations to this foundation monthly. And the foundation has almost no public footprint, no grants given, no events hosted. It is a shell. I whispered, it is a bucket. Vance corrected. He is pouring the company's liquidity into a bucket that he controls, hidden behind your mother's name. It is likely his retirement plan. He bankrupts the company, leaves the creditors holding the bag, and walks away with the foundation's assets, and he leaves Grant with the wreckage. I realized Grant would be the CEO of the bankrupt entity. Vance agreed. Your father would be the benevolent director of a well-funded charity. I felt sick. It was worse than I thought. He wasn't just sacrificing me. He was sacrificing Grant, too. He was cannibalizing his own children to ensure his own survival. I hung up. I pulled over to the side of the highway. I needed to breathe. I opened my laptop. I tethered it to my phone. I searched for the Eleanor Phillips Foundation. It existed. A bare-bones website. A mission statement about beautifying Alder Creek. I looked up the tax filings. They were public for nonprofits. Form 990. Assets, $2.4 million. Expenses, 0. Grants, 0. Director, Dale Phillips. He had stolen $2.5 million from the company over the last 3 years. That was why they were stealing from escrow. That was why they needed the silent partner. Dale was gutting the fish while it was still swimming, and he had named the knife after my mother. I closed the laptop. I put my head on the steering wheel. I cried. Not for myself, not for the money. I cried for the absolute, hollowed-out rot at the center of the man who had raised me. He had turned family legacy into a weapon. He had used love as a cover for larceny. And now I had to decide whether to expose him and destroy everything, or cut a deal and save the lie. I met Elise the next morning. I looked terrible. I hadn't slept. My eyes were red. My skin pale. "I know where the money is," I said. I told her about the foundation. Elise listened, her face grim. "This is criminal fraud," Elise said. "If you take this to the Attorney General, they will freeze the foundation. They will indict your father." "And the company?" I asked. "Barlow Ridge will be liquidated." Elise said, "The reputation damage alone will kill it. The employees will lose their jobs. The vendors will lose their invoices. It will be a crater." I looked out the window. I thought about Mrs. Higgins crying at her desk. I thought about the men in the Carhartt jackets at the market. They were innocent. They were just trying to feed their families. If I blow this up, I hurt them. I said, "Yes," Elise said, "but if you don't, your father keeps stealing, and eventually, he will blow it up himself. I have to choose," I said. Elise nodded. "You have leverage, Lucy, absolute leverage. You can dictate the terms, but you have to decide what outcome you can live with." I sat there for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. I took a notepad. I drew a line down the middle. I drafted 2 options. Option A, the scorched earth. I report the escrow theft and the foundation fraud to the authorities. I provide the evidence to the silent partner. Result: Dale goes to prison. Grant likely faces charges or bankruptcy. The company dissolves. The employees lose everything. I get nothing but the satisfaction of truth. The town hates me forever. Option B, the surgical strike. I use the evidence to force a settlement. Terms: Dale resigns immediately. He is removed from all company operations. The foundation assets, $2.4 million, are repatriated to the company to cure the escrow breach and pay down the debt. The silent partner extends the loan. Contingent on new leadership, I take 51% ownership. Grant keeps 49% but stays on as operational manager, under strict oversight. We install an external CFO to monitor every dime. Result: the company survives. The employees keep their jobs. Dale is neutered, but stays out of prison. For now. I become the thing I never wanted to be, the boss. I looked at the 2 options. Option A was justice. Option B was mercy. Mercy for the employees. Mercy for Grant, who was an idiot but perhaps not a monster. Mercy even for Dale, who would be stripped of his power but spared a cell. But option B required me to step into the mud. It required me to entangle myself with the very people who had tried to erase me. It required me to trust that I could control them. Grant had tried to trap me by making me the fixer. Option B was me accepting the role. But changing the script, I wouldn't be the fixer who covered up the crimes. I would be the fixer who ended them. I looked at Elise. "We are going with option B," I said. "But with a condition." "What condition?" Elise asked. "If they deviate 1 inch," I said. "If Grant hides 1 receipt. Or if Dale tries to walk into that office even once. We trigger option A. I want a signed confession from both of them, held in escrow by you. A confession of the fraud. If they cross me, I release it to the DA. Elise raised an eyebrow. "That is aggressive. I am not the peacekeeper anymore." "Elise," I said, "I am the warden." She smiled. A sharp, shark-like smile. "I will draft the papers," she said. I drove home. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anxiety was gone, replaced by the cold weight of responsibility. I was going to save the family business, but I was going to kill the family myth. I prepared the documents. I printed the spreadsheets. I printed the foundation tax returns. I printed the emails. I put them in a binder, a blue binder, just like the one Mom had told me to look for. I was ready for the final meeting. They thought they were dealing with a daughter. They were about to find out they were dealing with the majority shareholder. The final week did not begin with a bang. It began with the shuffling of paper. Dale and Grant were sprinting against a clock that had already run out, but they refused to hear the alarm. They spent 3 days flooding Eleanor Vance's office with documents, trying to prove compliance with the covenants, but panic makes for poor administration. Grant sent a cash flow statement on Tuesday that listed the escrow funds as liquid assets. On Wednesday, Dale sent a revised statement that listed the same funds as restricted capital. They were contradicting each other in real time. They were not just exposing the cracks in the foundation, they were circling them with neon highlighter. I watched from the sidelines, receiving courtesy copies of every desperate transmission through Elise. It was like watching 2 men trying to bail out a sinking boat, but they were using buckets with holes in the bottom. By Friday, the silence from Vance and Associates was deafening. "We need to meet," I told Elise. "Get them to your office." "They won't come," Elise said. "Tell them I have the tax returns for the foundation." I said, "They will come." They arrived at 10 in the morning. Dale wore a suit that looked like it had been slept in. His tie was crooked, a subtle disarray that was shocking on a man who usually treated his appearance like a religion. Grant looked worse. He was pale, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected the FBI to kick down the door. They sat on one side of the mahogany conference table. I sat on the other. Elise sat at the head, the neutral arbiter. I placed the blue binder on the table. "This ends today," I said. Dale looked at the binder. He didn't ask what was inside. He knew. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" Dale said. His voice was raspy. "You are enjoying holding the knife." "I am not holding a knife, Dad." I said, "I am holding the mirror." I opened the binder. I laid out the timeline. I spoke calmly, my voice stripped of all emotion. I was not the daughter asking for approval. I was the auditor asking for accountability. "Item 1, I said, "the power of attorney. You filed it 4 months ago. Grant, you have been signing Dad's name to shield him from liability while presenting him as the strong leader. That is fraud against the vendors." Grant flinched but didn't speak. "Item 2, I continued. "The Eleanor Phillips Foundation. You created a shell entity in Mom's name. Dad, you have siphoned $2.4 million of company revenue into it over 3 years. You called them consulting fees." Dale's jaw tightened. "It was for the future," he muttered. "It was a rainy day fund. It is embezzlement." I said, "You took operating capital and hid it in a tax-exempt bucket while you stopped paying the lumber yard." "Item 3, I said, turning the page. "The escrow accounts. You used client down payments to cover payroll last week. That is a felony." I looked at them. "And finally, the covenant." I said, "The silent partner deal. You knew that cutting me out would trigger the clawback. You did it anyway because you thought you could bully me into submission. You thought I would just fade away." Dale stared at me. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, his face crumpled. It wasn't a performance this time. It was a genuine collapse of his ego. "I did it for the family," he cried out. Tears welled in his eyes. "You don't know what it is like, Lucy. The pressure, the weight, every day. Someone wants money. The bank, the suppliers, the government. I was just trying to keep the walls standing. I built this for you. For both of you." I watched him weep. I felt a flicker of the old pity, but I snuffed it out. "You didn't build it for us." I said, "You built it for yourself. If you built it for us, you wouldn't have stolen Mom's name to hide your theft." Dale's head snapped up. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, vitriolic anger. "Don't you talk about her," he shouted. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is her doing. She poisoned you against me. Even from the grave. She is poisoning you. My mother saved you." I said, "She shackled me," Dale roared. "She didn't trust me. She looked at me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with the cookie jar. And she taught you to look at me the same way. You sit there with your binder and your facts, judging me. You are cold. Lucy, you are just like her, cold and terrified of taking a risk." I felt the heat rise in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that risk was not the same as stealing. But I breathed in. I breathed out. "She wasn't cold," I said quietly. "She was the only reason you didn't go to jail 10 years ago. And I am the only reason you aren't going to jail today." I turned to Grant. "Grant," I said, "you have a choice." Grant looked up. He looked like a trapped animal. "We are not going to renew the loan," I said. "What?" Grant whispered. "The investor isn't going to renew," I said, "because I am not going to ask them to." Grant stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. "Then we are dead," he screamed. "Without that $5 million, we are insolvent. The payroll checks will bounce on Monday." Then they bounce. I said, "You can't do this," Grant yelled. He was hysterical now. He slammed his hands on the table. "You have to fix it. You have to talk to them. If the company goes under, I lose everything. People will know." "Know what?" I asked. "That I am a fraud." Grant screamed. The words tore out of him. "That I am just the guy who inherited a title he didn't earn. That I have been signing Dad's name because I don't know how to run the business myself." He stopped, breathing hard. The silence that followed was heavy. Grant slumped back into his chair. He put his head in his hands. Dale looked at his son. He looked shocked. He had spent so much time pretending Grant was the future that he hadn't noticed Grant was crumbling under the weight of the lie. "You broke him, Dad," I said. "You needed a puppet, so you hollowed him out." The end came 2 hours later. We were still in the office when Elise's phone pinged. She checked the screen. She looked at me. "It is done," she said. "Vance and Associates just filed the notice of withdrawal. They are exercising the clawback. The $5.1 million is due immediately." Dale closed his eyes. The news hit the town with the speed of a brush fire. By 2 p.m, the phone in Grant's pocket started buzzing and didn't stop. First, it was the lumber yard. They were freezing deliveries. Then, it was the project manager at the Riverview site. The concrete trucks had turned around at the gate. The check for the deposit had been flagged. Then, it was the rumors. In a town like Alder Creek, bank failures are discussed before the bank even opens the letter. I watched my father and brother. They were paralyzed. They had spent so much energy fighting me that they had no energy left to fight reality. The illusion of the estate evaporated in real time. The house? It would be seized to pay the judgment. The cabin? It was already cross-collateralized. The business? It was a hollow shell, stripped of its cash, drowning in obligations. Grant's promised kingdom was nothing but debt wrapped in pride. I stood up. "I am filing a petition with the court," I said. Dale looked at me. He looked old, defeated. "To bankrupt us?" he asked. "No," I said. "To save what is left." I slid a document across the table. "This is a proposal for a court-supervised restructuring," I said. They looked at it. It was option B, the surgical strike. "Here are the terms." I said, 1. I said, "Dad, you resign. Today. You step down from the board. You step down from the foundation. You sign over control of the foundation assets to the company to cover the escrow theft." Dale opened his mouth to protest. "If you don't," I said, cutting him off, "I hand this binder to the district attorney, and you spend the rest of your life in prison for embezzlement." Dale shut his mouth. He looked down at his hands. 2. I said, "Grant, you stay. But not as CEO. You stay as operations manager. You answer to an external CFO that I appoint. You earn a salary. You do not touch the checkbook." Grant looked at me. "Is that it?" "No," I said. 3. I take 51% ownership of Barlow Ridge. I control the board. I control the strategy." Dale looked up. His eyes were wide with stunned betrayal. "You are stealing my company," he whispered. "I am not stealing it." I said, I am buying it, and the price is your freedom. But the 5 million? Grant asked. Will the investor stay? No, I said. The 5 million is gone. We are going to have to pay it back. We are going to have to sell land. We are going to have to shrink the company. We are going to be smaller. We are going to be humble. But we are going to be honest. Dale shook his head. He looked at me as if I had committed a moral crime, as if insisting on reality was the ultimate betrayal of the family code. You are destroying the legacy, he said. I looked at him. I felt a wave of sorrow, not for the loss of the money, but for the loss of the father I had wanted him to be. I wanted him to be proud that I had found a way to survive. Instead, he was just angry that I had turned on the lights. The legacy was a lie. Dad, I said, I am just sweeping up the ashes. The next week was a blur of lawyers and judges. We filed the papers. The court appointed an overseer. The foundation assets were frozen and repatriated. Dale resigned. He moved out of the big house before the bank could take it. He moved into a condo on the other side of town. He didn't say goodbye to me. Grant stayed. He showed up to work on Monday. He looked relieved. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to pretend to be the king. He could just be the guy who made sure the trucks ran on time. The town was confused. They saw the under new management notices. They heard about the downsizing. They whispered that Lucy Phillips had come back and taken over. Some people glared at me. Some people thanked me. Mrs. Higgins hugged me and cried because her pension was safe. I didn't care about the whispers anymore. I sat in Dale's old office. I had removed the heavy curtains. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes. The company was battered. We were in debt. We had a long, hard road ahead, but for the first time in 20 years, the books were clean. I was working late on a Thursday when my email pinged. It was a personal address, encrypted. I opened it. There was no subject line. Ms. Phillips. My client has authorized me to send this final communication. The withdrawal of funds was a necessary action to break the cycle of deception. It was not an act of malice, but an act of correction. You navigated the collapse with a clarity that your father lacked. You chose the hard truth over the easy lie. Regarding the future, review the original deed to the land on which the Barlow Ridge headquarters sits. You will find that it was never owned by the company, nor by your father. It was placed in a separate trust in 1995. The sole beneficiary of that trust is Lucy Eleanor Phillips. You did not just inherit the mess. You own the ground they were standing on. The story is yours now. E.V. I stared at the screen. 1995. I was 2 years old. Mom. She hadn't just protected me with the silent partner. She had protected the land. She had known, even back then, that Dale would try to leverage everything. So she had locked the dirt beneath our feet away in a vault he couldn't touch. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the equipment yard. I looked at the building that bore my family name. I owned the ground. My father had spent his life trying to push me off the board, never realizing that I was the board. The story wasn't finished. The debt was huge. The family was broken, and the scars were fresh. But as I watched the sun set over Alder Creek, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. I was standing on my own land, and I had a lot of work to do. Thank you for listening to Dad Announced Your Brother Deserves the Entire Estate. Then his company lost its $5.1 million silent partner. This story explores the painful reality of family businesses built on secrets and the courage it takes to break the cycle of generational trauma. I hope Lucy's journey resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Have you ever had to be the bad guy to save your family from themselves? Please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more dramas about betrayal, justice, and the secrets we keep. Until next time.